So today's daf in the Masechet Menachot is Samach Bet 62. Where'd you get? Are you at the top? Where'd you get up to exactly?
No, I am actually at the bottom of Samech Aleph at Tanya Idach.
Where's Tanya Idach?
It's four lines from the 5 lines from the bottom.
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, it's a little bit of the middle, but sure. So I'll start from there.
That's
No,
where my sugya stopped
yeah,
when
no, no,
I
no,
was
no
listening
problem. Happy,
to.
happy to start there. So let's read inside. So 5 lines from the bottom of Daf Samach Aleph Amud. First word. Tanya Idach, another brisa talking in the context here, of course, we're talking about who does tnufa, right? Who has to wave the animals. Not every animal requires tnufa, but many do, and the classic one is the shlamim, but of course there are many others. So it says the Breita, 5 lines from the bottom, Bnei Yisrael, right? It says when Bnei Yisrael bring a carbon, you do this tnufa. Ainli ela Bnei Yisrael. So you only know from that pasuk people who were born as Jews, which is a very interesting. We don't always say this. Gerim va'avadim shucharim minayim. People who became Jews either through converting or remember slaves who get freed become Jewish automatically. How do you know they also have to do tnufa on their carbon? Talmud Lomer hamakriv. The one who brings it, which implies it doesn't matter how you were born, anyone who brings it should do a tnufa. Says the Gemara, maybe that's not what it's telling you. Maybe it's telling you something very different. Oeinu ella zeh kohena makriv. Maybe it's telling you that the Kohen, meaning not the owner of the animal, but the Kohen who does the act in the Beis Hamikdash is the one who should do the tnufa, not the owner. And not to tell you that every owner does it. Kishu omer yadav tivienu, because it says the hands of the one who brings it, hare ba'alim amor. Clearly, we're talking about the Baalim. And it also says the Makriv. So Haketzad, how do you explain that? Kohen meniach yado tachat yadei Baalim umenif. As we said before, the Kohen and the owner do it together. So the Kohen and the Baalim together do the Tnufa. And of course to answer the earlier question, everyone does Tnufa, even a ger and an Eved Meshuchar. So that is the beginning of the Bright. It continues the Bright now on the top of Daf Samach Ben Amud Aleph. Ketzad oseh. How do you physically do miluim? What's the way it's done? Meniach emurim al pisat hayad. What you would do is you would take the emurim. This gets a little complicated. The emurim mean in this context sort of the fat and the it's fats, we'll call it, the chalavim, that you were going to put on the mizbeach. You put them al pisat yad. Pisat yad means the palms, basically,
Um,
of the person, of the owner, and we said just now the owner and the kohen. And then you put the chazeh v'shok alehem. You put the chest and the thigh of the animal, which is the parts that you end up giving to the kohen, on top of the fat. V'chol makom sheyesh lechem. Now, if you're talking about a carpet that has bread, like the toda, then halechem milamal. Then the bread goes on top. So it's like a big sandwich here, right? Now, it's really not clear to me, to be very honest with you, whether they, have a plate in between or something in between, because this is raw meat we're talking about, right? So this is not, and fat. And, it's not exactly very appetizing here, but, and it's about to be put on the Mizbeach, right? So these are all, it's not the bread, but everything but the bread is about to be put on the Mizbeach. Says the Gemara, Hecha. Now, where do you see that you put the bread on top? Amar of Papa b'miluim. You see it from the miluim because by the miluim, which are coming up, of course, right in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it says that you put sal hamatzot or shulivnei Hashem. You should put on top, right? I have the pasuk here because I have Navas Gemara. Misal
yeah.
hamatzah shulivnei Hashem lakach chalat matzah achat and one another and v'yasem ala chalavim v'al shokayim. And you put it on the fat and on the thigh. So that's where you see that you put the bread on top. My timer. Now, why? Sorry, it's Rav Papa. Yeah, my timer. Right. What is the reason that we say that this is the order of the fat and the pieces? Meaning, how do you know that the fat goes first and then the chazan and the shok go on top of it? Ilema, if it's mishum dechtiv, because it says in the pasuk shok hatruma v'chazeh hatnufa al isheach alavim yaviu lanif tnufa. So it says it pretty clearly. Take the shok hatruma, take the thigh, take the chazeh, the chest, and put it al isheach alavim on the fat that goes on the fire, right? But that's true. But achtiv, there's another pasuk that says, and it's really earlier, et hachelev al hachazeh yavienu. You should put the chelev on the chazeh. So this implies you put the fat on top, not on the bottom. Says Abaya, well, actually, you do both because there's 2 times where you stack them up. First, the Kohen, who demaiti le Kohen beit hamitzvah, right? Where do you get the fat from? So basically, they would check the animal, they would take it to the place where they butchered them, right? There was a place dedicated in the Azar, remember? There were the tables and the hooks, and they had Kohanim probably with big aprons, right? And they were actually cutting apart these animals, and then basically they would give to a Kohen the fat and the chazeh and the shok. He would walk it over to the second Kohen who would do the tenufa. So with the first Kohen, it was stacked the fat on top of the chazeh, and then when he handed it to the second Kohen, he flipped it over, right? So he passed it over, and it would be flipped. So it would be the fat on the bottom and the chazeh on the top. So that's how we understand it. So Maiti lekomi beit mitbechayim v'ramile, and he would hand it to the second Kohen who actually did the tenufa. Ask the Gemara, but there's another pasuk. Achtiv, there's another pasuk that says, "Vayasimu et chalavim al hachazot," right? And then, and the pasuk continues, "Vayakter hachalavim hamizbecha." So when you bring it to the mizbeach, you actually have the fat on top of the chazot. So again, it's flipped, right? You said the fat's on the bottom, and here the fat's on the top. Says the Gemara, there's actually a third Kohen. Who the Yavle, the Kohen Achrina, Azo Makterle. There's a third Kohen who takes it. There's a big debate whether there needs to be three Kohanim, but let's just say there's a third Kohen who takes it from the second one who did the Tnufa, right? So the first person brought it from the Beit HaMikdash, handed it to the second Kohen who actually does the Tnufa. That Kohen has it the way we said it, that the fat is on the bottom and the Emurim are on top. The Chazan and the Shok is on top. And then he passes it to a third Kohen who actually brings it to the Mizbeach, but the third Kohen flips it over. So by the time he gets to the third Kohen, the fat's on top and the Chazan and the Shok is on the bottom, right? So that is for the third Kohen. So Udi Yavle, the Kohen Achrina, Uazav Makterle. V'hakamashmalan, and the Chiddush of this whole Breita is the Ba'in and Shlosha Kohanim, that you basically need three Kohanim for the process of stacking this up and doing the Tnufa, right? And Mishum Dechtiv, Rovam Hadrat Melech, right? To tell you, obviously, the principle that the more we have, the better, right? So the more Kohanim we have involved, the more it's a beautiful avodah for Hashem, and we want to have a crowd.
It
Okay.
must have been dripping if it was fats also. I can't imagine what it looked like.
We were talking about this today. I learned the daf a couple times today already with my family, and Nava, but that was exactly my point. I mean, you can imagine fat from a dead animal that's raw. It's
Yeah.
not like a solid thing, right? It's
No.
like you
No.
said. There's
Yeah.
pieces that get on your clothing. Imagine what their clothing looked like. It must have been,
Yeah.
and you're, yeah, 100%. I'm not. We had a whole discussion about it. Anyways, continues the Mishnah that the next thing that you do tenufa for, we said was shtei halechem, shnei kifsei atzeret, right? And remember the shnei kifsei atzeret, which are zivchei shalmei tzibor, so it's a shlamim that's done for the tzibor, which means it's kodesh kadashim, unlike every other shlamim, which is kachim kalim. And there you brought the special two chalot that were done with it. And the two chalot were waved together with the shlamim. And remember, unlike a regular shlamim, where you wave it after you shecht it and you cut it up, here you would wave it when it was alive, right? You would take the living animal and you would put we'll see in a second, you'd put the challah on it and you would wave it together, right? Which seems a little challenging because living animals are very heavy, right? So either, I don't know, I don't really
It's
know.
the same thing if they're dead. I mean, it's dead weight, literally.
That is
So,
the pieces, right? Here it's the whole animal, right? You
yeah,
can't
yeah.
take a piece of a living animal. That's a problem.
Right, right,
Right. So,
right.
so I mean, obviously, I guess some goats or sheep you could probably lift. I mean, the shepherds lift the goats, right? The sheep, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess it's conceivable. Or you can maybe you don't have to lift it off the ground. Maybe you just have to push it and move it. It's not clear. But I presume, I mean, obviously with the sheep, you lift it up, but it's not nothing. The Kohanim had to be pretty strong. So says the Braita, Tanu Rabbanan. Let's understand. This is again the pasuk about the Shnei Halechem on Shavuot. It says, "Veinif hakohen otam al lechem habikurim." The Kohen waves them on the bread of the bikurim. Now, what does that mean? It sounds like you put the kvasim on the bread, right? Yachol yiniach kvasim al gabe halechem. Well, that doesn't. Now, that could be possible, but of course the bread would get pretty crushed. But Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk says al shnei kvasim. It repeats and it says you put it al. The pasuk is. It says, I'll read the whole pasuk. It says, "V'hinif hakohen otam al lechem habikurim tnufa lefnei Hashem al shnei hakvasim." They're on the shnei kvasim. Now, of course, the question is, what's on what, right? It says you put them, meaning the kvasim, on the lechem, which are on the kvasim. So it sounds very confusing. So ask the Gemara. The Gemara Talmud Lomer al shnei kvasim. I al shnei kvasim yachol lechem agabi kvasim. Talmud Lomer al lechem habikurim. So it doesn't. It's really unclear. Robert, good to see you. We're around 12 lines down from the top of Samach Bet Amud Aleph, and we're dealing with a very, very confusing pasuk talking about the Shtei HaLechem. So the pasuk says, I'll read it again. Heinif HaKohen otam, the Kohen waves them, them referring to the animals, al lechem habikurim, on the bread, tenufa lifnei Hashem, al shnei kvasim, on the two sheep. So it's very confusing, as the Gemara says now. Nishtakel hakatuv. The pasuk is shakul. The pasuk is equivalent. Is a good translation. I don't know what they use, but meaning shakul means things are equal, right? There's no clarifying words in the pasuk. It really leaves it open, and it's not clear. Any odeim lechem agabi kvasim and kvasim agabi lechem. We don't know if the bread is on top or the lambs are on top, right? It's really unclear from the pasuk. Says the Braita, how do you resolve this? Look for context. Ma matzinu b'kol makom lechem lamala, afkan lechem lamala. Everywhere else, the bread goes on top, so here too the bread should go on top. And so basically, you lift up the lamb with the bread on top of it. Now, what does everywhere else mean? What do you mean? Where am I? Heicha. Where's everywhere else? Amar Rav Papa b'miluim, like we just quoted, that by the miluim that the Nesiim brought, it says that they put a basket of matzah, and they take them and put them on top of the karban and wave them. So you see clearly there that the lechem go on top. And so here too, the lechem go on top. So that's the first answer. The bread goes on top. Rabbi Yossi ben Meshullam says, no, I would say kfasim lamala. In fact, the first part of the pasuk says you put them on the bread. The lambs go on top of the bread. So you lift the bread up and put the lamb on top of it, and you wave it. The second part of the pasuk said you put it on the two lambs. Mani mekayim al shnei kvasim. That's not saying do the tnufa on the shnei kvasim. It's saying there are other lambs on Atzeret, right? Because every holiday you brought seven kvasim for a carbon ola. And what it's telling you is don't worry about waving those. You don't need bread for those, right? You only do the waving of the bread on the two kvasim. But the kvasim go on top of the bread. So that's the hotzi shiva. It's to exclude the other seven kvasim that are brought on Atzeret. That's the second answer. So the first answer is the pasuk's unclear, put the bread on top. The second answer is read the pasuk literally and put the kvasim on top of the bread. And Chanina ben Chachinai says, I have a more creative answer. Why don't you put the bread in between the kvasim? Right? And Rashi understands a little bit funnily that this means that you basically have the lamb crouched down. And so as the lamb crouches, the legs bend and the bread goes between the legs, right? So you could do that. Others say a little bit more simply that you just put it sideways, right? Put the lamb sideways and put the bread between the thighs of the lamb. Now, lambs might not like being sideways, so I'm not sure how that works. But either way, you put the lamb on top and the bottom, and so that's the way are, and therefore you can be mekayim both parts of the pasuk. Where am I? Nimsa mekayim shnei mikrot halalu. You could fulfill both parts of the pasuk. Lechem al gabi kvasim. You have the bread on the lambs, and kvasim al gabi lechem. So it's a beautiful solution. Says Rebbe, it's not a beautiful solution at all because that's disgusting. I mean, like it's not a very, very proper thing to either put the lamb on its side or to have it crouch down and stick the bread between the legs of the lamb and lift it up, right? Says Rebbe, Lifnei melech basar v'damei no simkeim. You wouldn't do this in front of a normal king, a human king. Lifnei melech malchem lachim hakadosh baruch hu simkeim. Is this respectful to do in front of, Hakadosh Baruch Hu? Ella, says Rebbe, I have the best answer. You don't put anything on top of anything. They're next to each other. Miniach zeh b'tzad zeh u'meinif. You have the bread on one hand and the lamb on the other, or you put them next to each other and you wave it. You don't sit anything on top of anything else. The pasuk means that they're next to each other. The pasuk says on top of. Haba inan al. It says on the bread or on the kvasim. Amalei Rav Chisda, the Rav Hamnuna. V'amalei Rav Hamnuna, the Rav Chisda. This is Rebbe L'tamei. This is the opinion that we see from Rebbe in many other places. The Amar al b'samuch, that the word al does not mean on, it means next to, right? When the Torah says do something al something else, it doesn't always mean on top of the thing. For example, in this week's parsha, when it says vayavo hanashim im al hanashim, right, to bring the nidava, it doesn't mean on, it means next to, with them. So here too, it means next to. Tanya, now where's the source of that? We're now at the first of the intermediate lines. It says by the lechem apanim, right? You have loaves of bread for the lechem apanim, 6 loaves on each side, and it says in the pasuk v'natata al hamarechet levona zaka, put on the marechet, on the stack of bread, put the pure levona. Now that sounds like you put a basket of levona on the bread. Says Rebbe, it doesn't mean on the bread. Al b'samuch, it means next to the bread, so that We always learn, remember, that the shulchan had a surface. You had two stacks of bread, and in the middle you would put the bezichim of the levona, but not on the bread. Says the Braita, says the Gemara at least, At Omer al besamuch, does al mean next to it? Oeno al mamash. Maybe the word al means literally on the bread. Kishu Omer, because we have a pasuk, and this is from today's parsha, V'sakota al haaron et haparochet, that you cover the aron with the parochet, right? The parochet is the covering for the aron. Now that would imply, if you took it literally, that you drape the parochet on the aron, which of course is not what you do. You hang the parochet in front of the aron. So you see from here, Havi Omer al besamuch. Clearly, al means in front of, next to. So it doesn't, the parochet doesn't literally drape the aron, but it's next to the aron, and that's what it means by draping it. Okay, that's Rabbi's opinion. Continued the Mishnah. Now, the Mishnah, if you recall, this is 2 days ago, I think we had the Mishnah, said that what you do when you do tnufa with the karban is that you move it back and forth and up and down, right? Molich umevi, which we understood to mean you send it out, you put it out, and you bring it back in. And malel morid, and you lift it up and you put it back down. Says Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, it's actually a little bit more, there's a little bit of a debate here about whether this applies to all karbanot or just very specific ones like the Shtei Alechem. So let's read it simply. What you're supposed to do, says Rabbi Chia bar Abba, is molich umevi. You're supposed to do back and forth lemisha ruchot shalo, to symbolize to Hashem, who's in charge of the winds, right? That you're showing that this is something that you're doing for Hashem, and you're moving it all around because that's Hashem is everywhere, as we sing, right? And
Is it
Ma'alel,
like, is it like the lulav? I was
exactly. We'll
thinking,
get there. Exactly. We'll get there. Ma'aleh umorid, you put up and down. Lemisha shamayim v'aretz shelo, the same thing. The idea is that Hashem is in the heavens and the earth. So you're showing that you're doing in all directions. Now, it's very interesting because Rashi here says something very interesting which affects the lulav, because Rashi talks about back and forth to all the winds, all the directions. So Rashi says all the directions, and Rashi says the directions, but not in order. He says Safon, Darom, Mizrach, Marav. So people take this very literally, even with the lulav, and they don't do it in the regular order. They don't go around, they go front, back, side, and side, right? Which might be what Rashi means, but it's probably not, because Rashi probably just telling you the four directions, right? So north, south, west, east. It's not like, or east, west is how he says it. Anyways, those are the four directions. B'marava matnu. Now in Eretz Yisrael, they taught the following braita, hachi. Amar Chamer bar Ukva, Amar Yossi bar Chanina, molich umevi, that the reason that you go back and forth with the carbon mincha, or the carbon shlamim, Shtei Alechem here, is kedei la'atzor ruchot ra'ot. You want to stop, you want to pray to Hashem to stop bad influences from bad winds, right? Ruchot ra'ot. And ma'aleh morid is kedei la'atzor tlalim ra'im. And going up and down is to stop bad dew, right? So things coming from Shemayim, if coming from the earth, that cause sickness or illness or infection, whatever it might be. You're basically davening for Hashem to protect us from the natural elements. And says Rabbi Yossi bar Rebavin, Zot Omer, this is what they mean when they say, Shiyare mitzvah makvinat hapuranot. I guess there was a statement. The Shiyare mitzvah means the shirayim, the leftovers, the small parts of the mitzvah, stop bad things from happening. And that's an example of the hatznufa. Think about waving. Waving is not, the main, when you think about a carbon, you don't think about the waving, you think about the blood and the burning and the eating. Tnufa is shiari mitzvah. It's a small detail of the mitzvah. Ve'otzeret ruchot rot utalim reim. But it's our prayer to stop bad winds and bad dew. Okay? Says Rabba, what Miriam said, v'chein lulav. And the same thing is true for the lulav. So exactly the same thing. We shake the lulav, and the same intentions apply, right? We're trying to pray for Hashem to protect us from ill winds and dew and rain and things like that are bad for us. Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Now Rav Acha bar Yaakov mamtile, he would bring it. Talking here about the lulav, he would bring it maitile umachvi. Hachi. He would point it. He would attack basically, and he would say, "Amar gira be'ena desitna." I'm throwing arrows into the eyes of the Satan. I'm using my lulav to attack. I'm attacking the Satan, right? He would use it like a military kind of thing. And says the Gemara, but that's a very bad idea. Lav miltahi, don't do what he did. Mishum da'ati lat gurebe, you're just starting fights, right? Why are you egging on the sleeping giant, right? What do you got to start with the Satan? Don't start making a story like you're attacking the Satan. Just leave it quiet. So don't do that. Okay, we're at the first of the widest lines, around 7 lines from the bottom. And we're about to get back into our interesting discussion about about waving karbanot, right? And I'm going to say this outside because it's very easy when you do it outside, and it's a really fundamental Gemara. There's two issues going on in our next Gemara. The main issue is something called Gzera Shava, right? Gzera Shava is where let me take it back. It's not just it's could be true by a hekesh also, but basically we're learning one thing out from another thing, right? And the two things we're learning from each other are the different shlamim. So the regular shlamim of a yachid, an individual shlamim, if I dedicate a shlamim, you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, you basically get the whole animal back, except for some parts that go on the mizbeach and the chazeh and the shok that go to the kohen, right? Those are matznot kuhuna. There, the Torah very clearly says you should wave it. After you shech the animal, you wave the chazeh and the shok, which means the chest and the thigh, and you wave it, and then you go and burn parts on the mizbech, and you give those to the kohen. By aziv shalmei tzibor, which is the carbon that was done on Shavuos, that's a public carbon. You first of all, it's different than every other shlamim in one way, which is that it's kachi kadashim. Kachi kadashim means that only kohanim can eat it. Nobody else can eat the carbon, right? So that's one big important principle. The second, the Torah very clearly says that you do tnufa when they're alive, right? Before you shecht it. It doesn't say whether you do tnufa after they die. So we learned it now, and you learned the Mishnah, so you know that we do, right? So we're about to learn from shlamim of a yachid that by shlamim of a tzibor, you also do tenufa after the animal is dead. The question we don't know the answer to yet is what kind of tenufa do you do? Do you do tenufa that's similar to a shlamim, which is just the chazeh and the shok, just the chest and the thigh? Or do you do tenufa like you did when it was alive? The tenufa you did when it was alive was the whole animal. So maybe after you shecht it, you pick up the whole animal and you do tenufa again. So we don't know the answer to that. And it really depends, we're about to say in a second, on the principle called don mina umina. We derive something from something else, in this case, the shlamim of the tzibor from the shlamim of a yachid, and then we do the same thing as that thing, mina umina. You do the same thing, just like the shlamim of the yachid, you do only the chazeh and the shok. By the shlamim tzibor, you do chazeh and the shok. Or do you say don mina v'uki ba'atra? Learn from something and then go back to your own home, right? Go back to your own source. And just like the Shalmei Tzibor, you shake the whole thing before it's shechted, you should shake the whole thing after you shecht it. So let's read that all inside. Tanur Rabbanan, 7 lines from the bottom. Says the Braita, Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor, the zvachim that are brought on Shavuot, that are belong to a tzibor, the Torah doesn't say whether you have to wave them after they are shechted. Says the Braita, you have to. Tu'unin tnufa la'achar shchita. And what do you wave? Tnufot kemot shehein. Wave the whole animal. Divrei Rabbi. So unlike a regular shlamim where you do the chazeh and the shok, here you do the whole thing. And the chachamim say, no, you do the chazeh and shok. Only wave the chazeh and the shok. B'maika miflagi. What is the basis for the machloket of Rebbe and the chachamim? Amalei Rav Chisda, the Rav Hamnuna. So Rav Chisda said to Rav Hamnuna, Amalei Rav Hamnuna, Rav Chisda. Some say it was the opposite. The question is how you compare one thing to another. B'don mina umina. Do you compare one thing to the other and then learn all of the halachot from the second thing? Or dominav uki batra? Do you derive a halacha from one thing and then you go back to the source in order to interpret it? Kamifliki. Rabbanan Savri, 4 lines from the bottom, don mina umina. You derive from something and you stick with that thing. And this is the derivation. Just like zvachim of an individual need to be waved after you shech them, so too, a zvachim of a tzibor, where it doesn't say that, they're shlamim. They should have tnufa after shchita. Umina. But then you compare it to the shlamim. Ma hatam by shlam of a yachid b'chazeh v'shok. You only wave the chazeh and the shok. Afachanami b'chazeh v'shok. So that's the chachamim's opinion. The Rebbe says, domina v'uki ba'atra. That no, you learn from shlamim, and then you go back to zivchei shalmei tzibor to interpret what you're learning. And what do you say? Just like zvachim of a yachid need tnufa after you shech them, so that we agree on. But says Rebbe, then uki ba'atra, you go back to shlamim of a tzibor and hatam hu de chazev v'shok. By yachid, it was a chazev v'shok. Avahacha kemot sheheim b'chayim. Right? Or I read it twice. Kemot sheheim b'chayim. Here you do it the way they were when they were alive. And obviously, when an animal's alive and you wave it, you have to wave the whole animal. You can't take apart. So too, by the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor, you do the wave the whole animal. So that is the Machloket Rebbe and the Chachamim. Turn the page to Daf Samach Bet Amud Aleph at the top. So that's the first explanation. Rav Papa says, I disagree with that. Tekuli Alma Don Mino Minahu. Everyone says that when you learn something, if you're learning Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor from Shlamim of a Yachid, you should apply all the rules of the Yachid. Why does Rebbe say that you waive the whole thing? If by a Yachid you only waive the Chazev Shok. I know time into Rebbe. The reason for Rebbe is that Rebbe says the reason you do Chazev Shok on a Shlamim of a Yachid is that a Shlamim of a Yachid gets eaten by the Yachid. And only the Chazeh and the Shok go to the Kohen. So you're only waiving the parts that go to the Kohen. But a Shlamim of a Tzibor is Kachei Kadashim. The whole thing goes to the Kohanim. So when you waive it, you should waive the whole thing because that's what's eaten by the Kohanim. It's not a different halacha. It's kihatam. It's like the shlamim of a yachid. Ma hatam davar shematana lekohen, afacha davar shematana lekohen. So really, the reason you're waving the whole animal is because a different part of the animal is given to the kohen, not because you don't learn it from the shlamim of the yachid. So that's the second explanation. Ravina says, I have a whole nother explanation. Dekuli alma domina v'uki ba'atra. Everybody says that if you learn from one thing to another, you still go back to the original thing and you learn the details. So if you learn shlamim of a tzibor does tnufa from shlamim of a yachid, you would stop there and you would go back to shlamim of a tzibor and you would learn out how to do it, which would be the whole animal. Why do the chachamim say you don't do the whole animal? The reason is that they don't learn one from the other. They say the source of a shalmei tzibor having tnufa is not a shalmei yachid. It's from a pasuk. Hainu tamid rabbanan shalmeihem ribuyahu. The pasuk that says by a shlamim of a yachid, you should waive it. It says shalmeihem, telling you every shlamim is the same, so that every shlamim is done with chazeh and the shok, and not the whole animal. And so it's not because domina umina. It's because there's a special pasuk that says every shlamim after it's shechted, you waive the chazeh and the shok, whether it's a shalmei tzibor or a shalmei yachid. So there's no extra need for a more complicated discussion. So that is Ravina's answer. Continues the Gemara now, and this was a part of the Mishnah, which basically said, remember, there are 3 different karbanot. There's 3 different actions you can do. Each one of the karbanot has 2 out of the 3, right? Remember, the 3 different actions are smicha. So smicha is done when an animal's alive. If you lean on a dead animal, it's not going to hold its weight, right? So you do smicha for many karbanot, not every. That's one thing. The owners do smicha on an animal before it dies, before they shecht it. Tnufa, waving it, which you can do while it's alive, like you do for Shalmei Tzibor, or tnufa after it dies, right? Which you could do for the parts, like you do for a regular shlamim. So those are 3 actions: smicha, tnufa chayim, and tnufa shchutim, right? And there's 3 karbanot, and each one gets 2 out of the 3. So let's read that. That's again from the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon Omer, shlosha minim tunin shalosh mitzvot. There's 3 types of karbanot that have 3 mitzvot involved in them. Shtayim b'chol echad. Each of the 3 karbanot have 2 of these mitzvot. They don't have the third. So each gets 2 out of 3, and of course there's 3 different combinations of 2 out of 3. Elohim, these are the 3 karbanot. Zivchei shalmei yachid, right? First one is shlamim that are brought by an individual, a regular donation of a karban shlamim. The second one is zivchei shalmei tzibor, karban brought of a shlamim by a community, like on Shavuos. It's the only example. And the third is an asham mitzorah, right? Remember, a mitzorah, at the end of their time, they bring an asham. And with the asham, they bring bread and they bring everything, and they have to wave it, right? We'll see. So what are the rules for these 3? Zivchei shalmei yachid, a shlamim brought by an individual, to an smicha chayim. You have to lean on it when it's alive. And you have to do tnufa shchutim, after it's shechted. Ve'ein behen tnufa chayim. But you don't do tnufa while it's alive. So those are the 2 out of the 3 that you do. Zivchei shalmei tzibor, now zvachim that you bring on Shavuot for the Shtei Alechem, the Kifsei Atzeret, tunim tnufa chayim u'shchutim. You have to wave them when they're alive and wave them again when they're shechted. Ve'im behem smicha, but you don't lean on them before they shechted. You don't do smicha for them. And the third one, asham mitzorah, the asham that's brought by a mitzorah, tu'unin smicha, you do smicha, tu'un smicha when it's alive, u'tnufa chay, and you wave it when it's alive. But there's no tnufa after you shecht it. So those are the facts, according to Rabbi Shimon. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. Like everything in the Gemara, why don't you learn one out from the other? Ask the Gemara, why don't you say the zivchei yachid, which need the smicha, and they need the tnufa when they're dead, when they're shechted, they should also need tnufa when it's alive from a kal v'chomer. What's the Kal V'chomer from Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor? Uma Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor. The halacha by Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor she'ein tunin smicha chayim, right? Zivchei Shalmei Tzibor do not require smicha when they're alive, but they're tunin tnufa chayim, right? But they need to be waves when they're alive. It's a little hard, but we're halfway down Samach Bet Amud Bet, right near the two dots, right? I'll read again from the two dots, right? So again, the question here is that the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah basically said that of the three karbanot, the zvachim, the shlamim of a yachid, the shlamim of a tzibor on Shavuot, and the asham of a mitzora, each of them need two out of the three mitzvot and not the third, right? And we said which two of the three. Ask the Gemara now, why don't you learn the third from a Kal V'chomer from the other ones? So let's read the first one. So I'm going to read again from the two dots. I apologize. You use zivchei shalmei yachid to unin tnufa chayim mikal v'chomer. Why don't you say that a zivchei shalmei yachid, an individual shlamim, needs to have tenufa when it's alive, right? From a Kal V'chomer. What's the Kal V'chomer? Ma zivchei shalmei tzibur. When you think about the shlamim that are done by a tzibur on Shavuot, ein tu'unin smicha chayim. They don't need smicha, right? And we'll see that we learn that they never need to be leaned on, but they do need tu'unin tenufa chayim. They need to be waves when they're alive. The Torah says that. So in one way, this is a kal karban. It doesn't need smicha, so that's what makes it kal. It does need tenufa chayim. So zivrei shalmei yachid. Now come to a shlamim of a yachid, which is a more chamor thing. Shetu'unin smicha chayim. It does need to get smicha. The owners do need to lean on the animal. So enodin shetu'unin tenufa chayim. They for sure should need to be waved when they're alive. So that seems to be a good kal v'chomer, right? That in this regard, the shalmei tzibor are more kal because they don't need smicha. The shalmei yachid are chamor. You should have a kal v'chomer. Interesting one, you're right, but there's a pasuk. Miyut rachmana gabe zivchei shalmei tzibor, where the Torah says that you do tnufa michayim, which is by the zivchei shalmei tzibor. It says otam, do it for them. Otam lemute zivchei shalmei yachid. Otam specifically and explicitly excludes a different karban shlamim, and the different karban shlamim is the shalmei yachid. So that's why you can't learn that kal v'chomer. Says, okay, let's do the next one. V'yiyu zivchei shalmei tzibor tu'unin smicha mikal v'chomer. So now I should say there's a different kal v'chomer, that the zvachim of the tzibor, the shtei kivsei atzeret, should need to have smicha done on them from a kal v'chomer, from a shlamim of a yachid. What's the kal v'chomer? Ma zivchei shalmei yachid, right? The zvachim of the shlamim of a individual, she'ein tu'unin tenufa chayim. You don't need to wave them when they're alive. We just learned from a pasuk that you don't do that. Tu'unin smicha, but you do need to lean on them. That's based on the pasuk. Samach yado. Zivchei shalmei tzibor shetu'unin tenufa chayim enodin shetu'unin smicha. So then the zivchei shalmei tzibor, which do need to be waved when they're alive. So it's a more chamor thing. For sure, should need smicha. So that's the second question. Amar Ravina says, Ravina, you're right. It's actually a great question. The answer is because, right? The answer is Gemiri. It's a halacha l'Moshe miSinai. And what's the halacha l'Moshe miSinai? That shtei smichot b'tzibor. That there's only two times that with the karban tzibor you do smicha, right? Because if you think about it, smicha, of course, is generally done by the owner. Now we're going to discuss this more when we get to smicha, but smicha is done by the owner. A karban of a tzibor doesn't have an owner, right? It's the whole community, right? So what do? It says Ravina, we have halacha Moshe miSinai. That's what we usually mean when we say Gemiri, right? It's a halacha Moshe miSinai. Rashi says it here that only two times do you have a karban tzibor where someone does smicha. What are the two times? So Rashi explains the two times are, one is they're both based on the pasuk. The one is by a par helam davar shel tzibor, right, where the community forgets something and the elders bring a karban. It says v'samchu ziknei ha'eda et yidehem. It says that they do it. And the second is the sa'ir ha'mishtaleach on Yom Kippur, right? So sa'ir ha'mishtaleach on Yom Kippur, it says in the pasuk that the kohen leans on it and says vidoy. And those are the only two exceptions. Now, the Torah says it by those two, right? But you obviously would have said there are more things. The chiddush here is that although the Torah said it only by those two, it only means those two. Right? The halacha Moshe miSinai is that there's no other karban tzibor in which you have to do smicha. And so therefore, the zivchei shalmei tzibor of atzeret, of Shavuot, don't need smicha. So that's the answer to your second question. The third question, the last narrow line on Samach Bet Amud Bet, is why don't you say the third animal? V'yehei asham mitzora to'un tnufa shachut. Why don't you say that the asham mitzora, which we said needs smicha and tenufa when it's alive, it should also need tenufa when it's shechted, and that's from a kal v'chomer. What's a kal v'chomer? Ma zivchei shalmei yachid. Think about it. Zvachim of a shlamim of an individual she'ein tu'unin tenufa chayim. We learn from a pasuk they don't have tenufa when they're alive, but they do have to have tenufa when they're dead. Tu'unin tenufa shchutim. So nasham mitzora, which does need tenufa when it's alive, shetaun tenufa chai, ein odin shetaun tenufa shachut. So you would have thought a kal v'chomer. Answers the Gemara, you're right, but there's a pasuk, and the pasuk says miyot rachmana gabe zivchei shalmei yachid. There's a pasuk by zivchei shalmei yachid which says do tenufa, but oto, right? You do tenufa on it, which is a lashon yachid. Oto limute asham mitzora. The purpose of oto is specifically to exclude an Asham Mitzorah. So that is how, although Rabbi Shimon said this halacha, that's why you can't learn one out from the other, and it remains the case that of these three karbanot, each one gets two out of the three. Last two lines of today's daf, Tanur Abanan says the Braita, while we're on the topic, Chamisha sheviu karban echad, right? Let's say you have five people give a shlamim together, right? Five families go in, they buy one animal, they bring a shlamim, they're going to have a huge barbecue. Who does tnufa? Says the Braita, echad meinifa yidei kulam. You don't need all five to do tnufa. One person can be the messenger and can do tnufa on behalf of the owners. And if an isha brings a karban, kohen meinifa yada, kohen can be tnufa on her part because there's no other owner. V'chein hashaleach karbonotav v'medinat hayam. And the same thing is true about a person who mails in their karban, right? They're not present, but they send in a karban. Kohen meinif al yado. Again, the kohen does the tnufa on behalf of the owner. So, although the owner usually does the tnufa with the kohen, if there's no owner there, then the owner can stay out of it, and the kohen can do it on their behalf. And we will stop here. We got perfectly up to the Mishnah on the top of Daf Samach Gimel. Tomorrow we're going to finish the parak and get to another exciting parak. But God willing, we'll learn tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m.
And smicha has to be done by the owner?
Shavua Tov.
Smicha has to be done by the owner?
Smicha is generally done by the owner. It's generally done by the owner. I think we're going to learn in the halachot of smicha whether you can appoint a messenger, like the kohen or someone else, to do it for you. But yes, it's usually done by the owner, again, because the purpose of smicha, well, not one purpose, is that it's sort of you're giving yourself over to the karban, right? It's putting yourself onto that animal, essentially.
Well, Dov learned yesterday that it may not be the case because if the owner is a woman, she may not be allowed to enter the place where they're doing karbanot. So technically she would, but she may not be allowed to do smicha. That's what Dov was mentioning yesterday.
Correct.
Not sure, but that's what he brought up yesterday.
Yeah.
So that is correct. We talked about that yesterday. So I think there's different scenarios. There are scenarios where where a woman has to come in, like by a sota, right? And other areas where a woman cannot come in. But correct, there are situations where you can appoint potentially someone or not do smicha, depending on the case, right?
Well, then he also brought the machlokas between how do you paskin, and he brought the Rambam versus Tosfot, where Rambam says that the Rambam says that that's based on a machloket Hillel and Shammai, and one says that smicha is necessary and one is not. And I think he said the Rambam holds that like Hillel versus Shammai, where it's not, or Shammai that it's not. I forget that.
I can't tell you no halacha, but again, what we said yesterday, just to review yesterday, was we talked about smicha being done by the owner, but as we said yesterday, and at least in our Gemara yesterday, that in a circumstance where the owner can't do smicha, either because they're not Jewish or a woman, in that case,
Right.
then you don't do smicha, right? Then it becomes not essential, essentially.
Well, that one, but he also brought the. So yesterday you heard what his discussion was then.
Well, I learned the Gemara yesterday. That's what the Gemara says.
No, he was bringing the Rambam and Tosfot.
Oh, so I don't know. I'm not familiar with Rambam and Tosfos.
Okay, I didn't hear you say that.
Okay. Shkoch, everyone. Have a good night. Shavua Tov.
Thank you. Shavua Tov.
Walking around with the snow.
Wait 1 second, 1 second. To the Rambam, he says the Rambam. See you later. Yeah, missed most of it tonight. Second. Yeah, well.